Hi, my name is Megan Smolenyak, and I'm a professional genealogist. I decided to look into Michelle Obama's roots, and this video, or really this glorified PowerPoint, is all about her ancestry. Now, I decided to do this for several different reasons. The main reason being, of course, that just her being in the White House is historic. Her being there with her mother Marion and her daughters Malia and Sasha. These are the first descendants of slaves to reside in the White House as members of the first family. And who knows what the future holds. Maybe one day one of them will reside there as the actual president. So I decided to look into her roots, but there were a couple other sort of triggers and reasons why I did this. The first being that back around the inauguration, I got a call from Jodi Kantor of the New York Times. And she asked me if I could look into Michelle's roots, and I agreed, but there wasn't much time. So I was only able to find out a little bit by the time the article came out. But that's what sort of sparked my curiosity. And one of the first things I learned when I looked into her heritage is that her mother, the first grandma, is actually a Shields by birth. And that got my attention because my own mother was a Shields by birth as well. So I was sort of interested in that aspect. But there's one other reason why I decided to look into her ancestry. If you look around, if you Google, you'll actually find quite a few articles and TV segments about her heritage. But they all focus on one part of her family tree. I'm going to show you a scrolling family tree here in a second. I'm just going ahead and start it, but I'm just going to ask you to look briefly at the yellow shaded part at the top. So if you look at all the articles and the TV segments that have been done about her heritage so far, they all focus on this yellow part of her family tree. It's her father's line from Georgetown, South Carolina. But if you continue to watch the tree as it scrolls by, you'll see that there's a little bit more to her heritage than just Georgetown, South Carolina. And I didn't understand why nobody ever paid attention to the rest of her family tree. So that's basically what I decided to do. And once we finish up here, okay. So I know that was kind of difficult to catch all that in movement, but just to give you sort of a shortcut here, if your family tree happens to have any of these surnames in it, there is at least a chance that you are some sort of distant cousin of Michelle Obama's. And just because I get a kick out of the names our ancestors used, here's a list of some of the more interesting names that adorn different branches of Michelle's family tree. Names like Bolus and Esau and Melvina, Powhatan, Tillman. I just really like those names. Now, one thing that struck me as I looked into her heritage is that it's very representative of the Great Migration. The mass movement of African Americans from the southern states to the northern states, mostly in the early part of the 20th century, mainly to major industrial cities like Chicago, of course, New York, Philadelphia. What we're looking at right now are the 10 states that are generally considered to be the genesis of the Great Migration. And if we just take away Texas and Arkansas, and then add in Missouri, Kentucky, and Illinois, we get Michelle's roots because she has ancestors from all 10 of these states. In fact, the primary difference between her heritage and just the Great Migration in general is just that some of her ancestors started moving north a little bit earlier than some of the others. So for example, there's one branch of her family that's actually been in Illinois, not Chicago, but in Illinois since at least the 1860s. Now, to give you a better sense of where her roots are, here's sort of a laundry list of the different states and towns, sometimes counties, that can claim a part of her past. Birmingham actually featured quite prominently, also Hale County in Alabama. Georgia, she had several branches of her family that lived in Georgia, probably still some cousins there today, but some of them lived there on their way to Alabama. We have Illinois, Chicago, of course. She's got quite a few ancestors who lived in Chicago, but also other places like Edwardsville, which is close to St. Louis, and Village Ridge in Pulaski County. She has ancestors from Kentucky, but I don't know where. My best guess is Mercer County, but I'm not absolutely sure about that. There's also Louisiana, Madison Parish. My best guess on that is probably a town called Tallulah. Then we've got North Carolina. We're talking the northern part of this state, right up on the Virginia border. Mississippi as well. She has several ancestors who lived there, but I don't know the locations. Vicksburg looks likely, but I can't 100% prove that. And we've got Missouri, St. Louis, which was, of course, a stopping way. A lot of people stopped there on the way even further north during the Great Migration. Got South Carolina, not just Georgetown, which her Robinson branch came from, but also Spartanburg, as I learned during this research. Tennessee, just one ancestor apparently came from there that I know of so far, and I don't know where in Tennessee. And then we have Virginia, and we're talking the southern part of Virginia, so Henry and Pittsylvania counties. Now, in terms of which of Michelle's ancestors made the trip north, I looked at her whole family tree, and there were about half a dozen people who made the trip north in about 5 different branches of her family tree, starting with Fraser Robinson. And this is the fellow who's most well known. This is the one whose ancestry has been featured in a number of articles. He was actually kind of the Johnny-come-lately in her family tree in terms of going to Chicago, because he didn't come until the early 1930s. He went from Georgetown, South Carolina to Chicago, and he actually made a return trip. He wound up returning back to Georgetown and passed away there back in the 1990s. Then we have James Preston Johnson. Now, he took a more meandering path. He actually started out in Louisiana, spent a little time in Mississippi, and that went a little bit further north to Edwardsville in Illinois, got married there, then went to St. Louis for a while, had a few children there before finally going to Chicago somewhere around 1906 to 1910. Now, he married Phoebe Moten, so part of their migrations overlap here. She actually started out in Illinois. She was born in Villa Ridge in Pulaski County, Illinois. She's from the branch that's been there since at least the 1860s. Now, her ancestors, as you see at the top of the slide, actually came from other places, Kentucky, Missouri, and Tennessee. But that particular branch has parked itself in Illinois for quite a long time. And then once she married her husband, James Johnson, they wound up, of course, overlapping each other. Now we come to Rebecca Jumper. Now, this is finally the first grandma's side of the family tree. This is Michelle's maternal half of her family tree. And Rebecca came, I have actually conflicting documentation whether she was born in the very south of Virginia or northern North Carolina. But she came from that neck of the woods. I don't know exactly when she came. There's oddly a number of records that should exist that seem to be missing for her, but she came sometime between 1910 and 1930, so obviously a part of the migration. And as far as I can tell, she made a very direct migration. Now, one thing that's sort of interesting about her branch of the family tree, this is the Jumper line, is that they were free well before emancipation. And one of the easiest ways to tell this is if you see an African American family that shows up in pre-1870 census records, because otherwise you were just listed as basically as a piece of property, as a slave, in the slave schedules and so forth. You were listed under your owner's name without any name for yourself. But this is, for instance, the Jumper family, the 1840 census, and I know it's a little bit hard to read. If we take a closer look here, we've got the head of household here. This is Peter Jumper. This is, I want to say it's one of her third great-grandfathers, second or third, but I believe third great-grandfather. And if we take a closer look over at this right-hand side, you see there where it says free colored persons, and it gives you tick marks for the genders and the different age groups. Okay. So we see that the family was free back in 1840. Now, I thought I would look more into this Jumper line, but it turns out that a gentleman by the name of Paul Heinig has actually spent years and years researching free African Americans from Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina, actually also Delaware and Maryland. But his first volumes were on this. And what he does is he finds all these, what would be considered for the most part, fairly obscure records, mostly in county courthouses, that show evidence of African Americans living free pre-emancipation. And he already had the Jumper family in his books. Now let me show you one quote there. The Jumper family was apparently related to Tom Jumper, one of 6 Tuscarora Indians. So that's kind of interesting. And by the way, this particular quote pertains to an incident that occurred in 1707. So it gives you an idea of how deep Michelle's roots are. Let me show you a little something else he had to say. Hagar Jumper, born around 1750. Okay, she obtained her freedom from a fellow by the name of Stephen Dance. This was in Dinwiddie County in Virginia. And it was in a court case based on her heritage being Native American. And this all occurred around 1800. Now, Paul Heinig is very highly regarded. He's won a number of genealogical awards over the years. And so I trust his research. So it appears that Michelle Obama is at least part Native American. Maybe going back quite a ways, maybe just a dash, but it looks like she has some Native heritage.